All right, last paper, you guys. This is exciting. Essay 5 is the last formal essay that you'll be writing for this course. So let me just go over this a little bit. And let me start off by saying that this essay is also 150 points. So essay 2, your argumentative research essay, was 150 points, and this one carries that same weight. So those of you who have been emailing me, how can I bring my grade up? What's the best way to earn points? Pour some time into this essay, all right? Don't write it at the last minute. Take your time doing your research and really pour some time in refining this and making sure you can get as many points as possible and that you follow all the directions. Okay, so for this one, you're going to be analyzing a short story. Essay 4 was on a poem or song. Here we're learning how to analyze literature in the form of short stories. So what I'm asking you to do is to identify and discuss at least one theme in your chosen story. So I try to make it as straightforward as possible. Choose a theme. How is that theme communicated? So you're going to talk about, at least 2 or 3 literary devices that are present in your story: symbolism, characterization, setting, imagery. Irony is another one you could talk about, plot. So all these different ideas, you want to figure out which ones are most prevalent in your short story in conveying the main theme. And so as you write your essay, you're going to support your identification of theme, which is essentially an argument. You're arguing this is the central theme of this story with examples and quotes from your story. And that is a really important requirement. You must have quotations from your story in order to get your full research points. You do want to avoid summarizing the plot. You can assume that I'm familiar with the story, which I am. So, don't feel like you have to retell the story. You can just discuss these different elements. And then as your conclusion, I do want you to evaluate the piece from a Christian perspective, specifically answering these 2 questions. Does the author acknowledge God? So is God present or absent in the story? And does the story present biblical truth or a different worldview? And a story doesn't necessarily have to acknowledge God or talk about Him in order to present biblical truth. And if you watch the video on your short stories for this week, I go into that a little deeper. And then I'm going to reference the notes on literary research here real quick later in the video to talk about how to find good sources for your story. Some other brief notes, 600 to 800 words, so not super long, a little longer than your essay 4, but still not a super long essay. You don't need a title page or outline, just use the same MLA format we've been using. You will need a works cited page. And as far as research, obviously the story you choose is going to be your primary source. And then you need at least 2 additional sources. We call those secondary sources. So you should have at least 3 entries on your works cited page to fulfill that research requirement. You can use internet research, but I really encourage you to use the databases. Anything from a study guide like SparkNotes or BookRags or eNotes, anything like that, I don't consider good research. They're just that. They're study guides, they're summaries. And while they provide some analysis, it's just not considered academic research. So don't use those. As you choose a piece of literature, you really can pick any classic short story. I give you a list here. If you have a different story in mind, just shoot me an email. In fact, I have you guys post in discussion board your chosen story and theme, so I can give you feedback on if that makes sense. I do want to reiterate, though, you cannot use either everyday use or sweat. So you can't write your paper on those because I've already given you that analysis. This is something that you need to do on your own. So list of stories here, and what you can do is look at the summaries on SparkNotes and just see which one sparks your interest before you spend a lot of time reading all these different stories. Or maybe you remember a short story that you read in high school that you want to write an analysis on. And then I also have listed here common literary themes. And so just to help, spark your brain in thinking about what is the big idea in this story, and remembering that theme is usually just one or two words. It's not a long phrase like you reap what you sow, or the early bird gets the worm, or what goes around comes around. Those are cliches. A theme is a single word like isolation, or justice, or survival, or tradition, or what have you. So I've got this long list for you to look at. Okay? So before I jump to the sample essay, let me pull up this PowerPoint, and I'm not going to go over every single slide, but I have these notes just to help walk you through how to craft a good thesis statement and how to do your research. So obviously you have to read your source, read your story first, and you really want to read it a few times to make sure you fully understand it, and then just kind of do some brainstorming on theme and the different elements that are important in your story. And as far as your thesis statement, I have really specific expectations. First of all, I should see the word theme. I'm just seeing a typo here, world. Should be word. So for example, the theme of guilt is evident in Poe's short story, The Telltale Heart, through characterization and symbolism. Or setting, irony, and symbolism all contribute to the theme of oppression in Kate Chopin's Story of an Hour. So this is a pretty clear formula for how to craft a good thesis. This is what I'm looking for. Remember that your thesis statement comes at the end of your introduction. So your introduction is more just about introducing the title, the author of the story, a couple sentences on what it's about or maybe where it's set, that kind of thing. And then you want to end your introduction with a very clear thesis statement. And then it's going to make sense to structure your essay around these literary devices. So you'll have one paragraph on setting, one on irony, one on symbolism, and then the unifying factor is going to be theme. All right, and so then I have a little slide here about common themes of literature and discussion of that. And then as far as research, our databases on the North Greenville website have a tab just for English. And so if you just go to Bloom's Reference Center or Literature Resources from Guelph, if you pull up that database and type in your story, type in The Telltale Heart or The Birthmark or The Lottery or, whatever story you're analyzing, it should pull up some really good critical analyses, articles for you to read. And then the idea is you're going to find quotes in those articles that support your analysis, okay? And what I want to emphasize here is that this really does take time, okay? So just allow yourself time to find those two sources. And then, of course, the most important source is your primary source. And so you do need to add quotations from your primary source, and it lends you credibility as an author. It shows that you are familiar enough with the story to integrate specific details into your analysis. And I would say for each body paragraph, you should have at least one quote from the story. And not just a paraphrase, use an actual quote. Even if it's short, even if it's just, a short phrase, those details lend you good support. And then for your secondary sources, just include at least one quote or paraphrase from each source. You don't need to rely too much on your secondary sources, just incorporate them at least once. And common mistakes, most common is relying on plot summary. Remember, this is not a book report, it is an analysis. So if you have lots of plot summary, then you are going to lose points for content. And don't forget to tie your main points to the theme. So, when I go over the sample essay, I'll point out a couple things on there. And then for conclusion, tie in your theme to the Christian view of the story. So again, just a quick overview on that. And then let's look briefly at this sample essay that I posted. So this is a sample essay on sweat. So hopefully you read the story and then reading this essay will make sense to you. And this student chose to give some background information on the author, which is not necessary, but it works in this paper. You don't have to do that. Will you draw your attention to the thesis statement? This theme of justice is interwoven throughout the narrative in setting, characterization, and symbolism. So really good thesis statement. And then what I also want to draw your attention to here is the topic sentence. So the student says, you don't have to use Miss or Mrs., you can just say Hurston. Hurston's choice of Eatonville, Florida as the setting contributes to the overarching theme of justice. So we know that this paragraph is going to be about setting. And then she goes on to talk about the setting, about the heat imagery and its connection to the title of Sweat. And she uses these very specific quotes from the story. And this is a really good example of how to integrate your quotes. Hurston writes, it doesn't have to be complicated. Just use a lead-in. The author states, something like that. Or the narrator says, or what have you. And then she gives a nice quote that supports her point about setting and how that really mirrors this pressure and heat that Delia feels in her marriage. And so then this is a good example of how to use your secondary source. And then we have a further quote from the story. So, and again, the idea that the paragraph is unified around a single idea works really well. And then here you have a really good transition and topic sentence for the next paragraph. While the setting contributes to the intensity of Delia's situation, Hurston's characterization of Delia and Sykes emphasizes the theme of justice. So transitioning us from setting to characterization and staying unified on that idea of we're talking about justice. And so then the author provides some discussion and quotes about the characters of Delia and Sykes, gives us some supporting quotes right there to emphasize that. She actually has this separate paragraph about each character. So that's fine. If you're talking about characterization, you can use separate paragraphs for each character. And then finally, her final paragraph, Hurston's strongest method to proclaim the message of justice is her use of symbolism. And so then she talks about the different symbols in the story. And so this is a really good paragraph. And then a conclusion. Now, I want to say this. First of all, this essay is a little longer. I actually pulled this sample from one of my literature classes where I teach American literature. So your essay won't be quite this long. And the conclusion isn't exactly the same as what I'm asking you to do. But it was just a really good sample essay on sweat. And the main thing I want you guys to take from this is the students' overt use of these terms, the literary devices, that's something I'm looking for, and the balance of research and analysis. So the student has the perfect amount of quotes from the story and a good use of secondary sources. So hopefully this gives you an idea of what I'm looking for in Essay 5. And this takes time. Analyzing literature is a little more tricky than, I think, asserting your own argument like you did in Essay 2, because you have to have understanding of this other text. And then you have to present your analysis of that. So there's a few more layers of complexity in this essay. So take your time. If you have questions, shoot me an email, let me know, and I hope everyone just does their best, and I look forward to reading these essays.